I was 27 when a single line spoken over a Christmas table forced me to look back at my entire childhood differently. For as long as I can remember, I lived on the edges of my own family. My mother could spend an entire evening talking about my brother's latest plans, his ideas, his potential, without ever pausing to ask how I was doing. I became used to sitting alone at the kitchen table, finishing homework in silence, while praise and excitement floated in from the next room. Being overlooked wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It became normal. I told myself it didn't matter, right up until the moment it finally did. That Christmas felt familiar in all the wrong ways. We sat around the same table we always did. Turkey steaming, mashed potatoes passed hand to hand, soft lights blinking lazily in the window. My mother leaned toward my brother, smiling easily, encouraging him as he talked through yet another business idea. She was already offering support, already imagining his success. I was there too, cutting my food, saying nothing. Then my brother looked at me with that same half-smile he'd worn since we were kids, the one that said he already knew where he stood. He asked if I was still wasting my time on that worthless company of mine. I didn't defend myself. I didn't react. I just shrugged, like it barely mattered, and said I'd sold it. The room went completely still. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. That company? Really? He asked how much it could possibly be worth, even using air quotes like he used to when we were younger. I met his eyes and said it plainly. $150 million. Everything stopped. His mouth fell open. My mother's face lost all its color. Her fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate with a sharp sound. In that silence, something shifted. Years of being ignored, dismissed, minimized, they didn't land on me anymore. They landed right back where they started. If you want to understand how the daughter her own mother barely noticed ended up delivering a $150 million truth at a Christmas dinner, and what that moment quietly set into motion, stay with me. Because I didn't grow up as the woman who could say something like that without shaking. When I was 8, I was just a quiet kid standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a scratched plastic cup, watching my brother's 13th birthday unfold like a ceremony meant for someone chosen. His name is Steve. He's 5 years older than me, and from the very beginning, he was the star of our family. That year, my mom, Karen, rolled a brand new mountain bike into our suburban Seattle backyard. It shined in the sunlight. Neighbors clapped. Kids cheered. Someone shouted that Steve was destined for great things. My mom hugged him tightly, whispering how proud she was, as if she were afraid someone might take him away. I stood a few steps back in an old thrift store t-shirt, unnoticed. No one asked if I wanted to be in the pictures. Steve's birthdays were always big, balloons, outdoor parties, layered cakes, sometimes entire weekends built around him. Mine were quieter. Usually a discounted cake, a couple of candles, and my mom apologizing because she was busy. One year, Steve got a Disneyland trip for graduating. I received a drugstore card and some cash left on the kitchen counter. When Steve reached school age, my mom fought relentlessly to place him in an expensive private school. He wore crisp uniforms, brand new sneakers, attended soccer practice, piano lessons, and summer camps that cost more than our car. I went to the local public school with peeling paint and outdated textbooks. When I asked why things were so different, my mom would pat my shoulder and say Steve needed special stimulation. He was gifted. I would be fine. At first, it sounded like reassurance. Over time, you'll be fine slowly became, we don't need to try for you. My dad worked long hours at a bank and was rarely home for dinner. Even when he mostly stayed out of decisions, schools, money, activities. There was an unspoken order in our house. Steve at the center. My mom revolving around him. My dad lingering on the sidelines. And me somewhere on the edge, as long as I didn't cause problems. By 12 or 13, I stopped asking. I stopped questioning why Steve always got the new phone, the new laptop, the extra tutoring, while I didn't. I stopped running into the living room with my A+ tests because my mom was always on the phone with one of Steve's teachers or driving him to practice. When I needed extra books, she hesitated. For Steve, the answer was always yes. For me, it was always later. So I learned to handle things on my own. I started watching YouTube videos to teach myself how to cook simple meals because I didn't want to ask for takeout money. In middle school, I picked up dishwashing shifts at a nearby coffee shop, saving every tip in a jar hidden in my closet. That jar eventually turned into my first used laptop. I began noticing every quiet dismissal and storing it away, not just as hurt, but as a list of reasons to never rely on anyone. At dinner, the conversation always revolved around Steve, his soccer games, his SAT scores, the colleges he might attend. I was present, but I was never the focus. I was just the extra chair. Somewhere during those years, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to make my mom see me and started planning a life that wouldn't depend on her approval. I didn't realize it then, but all those nights spent being invisible were doing something important. They were becoming fuel. Fuel for an idea, for a company, and eventually for that Christmas night when my mom would finally be forced to look directly at the daughter she had spent decades overlooking. College was supposed to be my clean break, my chance to step out of the background. I got into the University of Washington in Seattle with a partial scholarship in computer science. When the acceptance email arrived, I sat on the edge of my bed and read it 3 times, just to make sure it was real. My mom glanced at the screen, smiled, and said it was great, before asking if I could help proofread an email to one of Steve's teachers. A week later, Steve got into Stanford, and it felt like the Super Bowl had landed in our living room. There was a party. Relatives came over. Champagne bottles opened. My mom cried and told everyone her son was going to change the world. When I left for UW, she hugged me at the curb, said she was proud of me, and drove off because she was running late. When Steve left for Stanford, she flew with him, helped decorate his dorm room, and posted an entire album of photos online. My move-in day consisted of 2 suitcases and a used comforter I had bought with my own money. I lived in a cramped apartment near campus with 2 roommates, the kind of place where you could hear someone sneeze in the next building. My scholarship covered part of my tuition, but not all of it. To survive, I worked. I woke up at 4:30 every morning, pulled on my green apron at Starbucks, and spent hours misspelling names on cups before rushing to algorithms and data structures lectures with coffee stains on my sleeves. Between classes, I sat in the library with my beat-up laptop, watching free coding videos on YouTube and Coursera because textbooks were too expensive. While everyone else joined clubs and went to parties, I taught myself how to build simple apps. I didn't feel sorry for myself. In a strange way, it felt good, like I was slowly building something that belonged only to me. The idea that changed everything arrived quietly, through complaints. My friends were exhausted all the time. They pulled all-nighters, lived off vending machine food, skipped the gym for weeks, then crashed and wondered why they felt like zombies. My roommate joked that she needed something to tell her when to drink water and get moving. One afternoon, sitting at a sticky cafe table between shifts, it clicked. What if there was one simple app that tracked the basics, what people ate, how they moved, how they slept, and gently nudged them to do better without being annoying or overwhelming? I started sketching screens in a cheap notebook. Simple sleep graphs. Color-coded workout bars. Reminders that felt more like friendly texts than alarms. I settled on the name Health Track mostly because every other idea I had felt embarrassing, and this one still had an available website address. Most nights, I'd come back from late lab sessions, boil instant noodles, and sit in front of my screen coding until 2 in the morning. The earliest version wasn't pretty, but it did what it needed to do. You could record meals, exercise, water intake, and get a simple picture of your week. I shared it with a few friends and asked them not to sugarcoat anything. They didn't. They complained about clunky buttons, missing reminders, and charts that hurt to look at. It stung hearing it out loud, but I went back and fixed every flaw they pointed out. Slowly, users began to trickle in. A classmate mentioned it to her boyfriend, he passed it to his friends, and before I realized it, entire group chats were downloading it. One unexpected 5-star review hit me so hard I had to hide in a bathroom stall at work and cry it out. The day the app earned its first $500 through ads, I just stared at the screen, frozen. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more support than my family had ever put behind anything I did. I spent every dollar on a slightly better second-hand laptop so I could work faster and longer. Around then, calls from Stanford started coming in, full of stories about parties, connections, and how wild the tech world was down there. My mom lit up every time she talked about his classes and the doors she believed would open for him. One evening, I tried to share my own news. I told her the app had passed 1,000 users, that real people were using something I'd built from nothing. She paused, said a polite "that's nice," and immediately pivoted to how he might land a prestigious internship because a professor liked him. I sat there holding the phone, listening to her talk about imaginary futures while my very real work quietly downloaded onto phones I'd never see. That pattern never changed. Every small win on my end, top grades, new features, rising downloads, was met with silence or redirection. Eventually, I stopped mentioning it at all and let her believe I was just scraping by with the computer stuff. I kept going anyway. I studied between coffee orders, scribbled ideas on napkins, read documentation on my phone at bus stops. At the campus gym, I watched people glance at their screens between sets and imagined my app living there, nudging them quietly. I wasn't driven by payback or even money at that point. What kept me moving was the buzz I felt whenever someone said it helped them. I couldn't see it then, but those sleepless nights and ignored conversations were laying a foundation far bigger than a student project. Both the app and I were growing roots, and one day they would break through the limits my family had set for me. Finishing school early wasn't strategic brilliance, it was survival. Extra credits each term were cheaper than staying longer. While classmates debated travel plans and gap years, I was signing paperwork for a tiny office in Seattle's tech district. The building was dull, the carpet worn, the lights flickered, and the view was just a parking lot, but to me, it felt like owning a castle. This wasn't a hobby anymore. I registered the business, opened accounts, and moved my entire world into that room with 2 mismatched desks and a couch rescued from an online listing. My days became rigid blocks of work, mornings answering support emails and fixing bugs, afternoons building features, nights teaching myself marketing through free podcasts and blog posts. I replied to every review, messaged users who stopped using the app to understand why, and begged a freelance designer to make it look less homemade. Gradually, the numbers changed. Downloads sped up. People began sharing progress screenshots online. A local trainer asked to recommend it to clients. Then a small gym wanted a customized welcome message for their members. I agreed to everything. I added a simple paid tier, nothing flashy, just a few deeper insights for a small monthly fee. When the annual subscription total hit $50,000, the room felt like it tilted. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was undeniable proof this was real. That was enough to bring on 2 junior developers fresh out of school, people like me who just needed someone to believe in them. We squeezed into that office with cheap laptops, takeout containers, and endless cups of coffee, pushing updates week after week. Around the same time, the Golden Stanford storyline began to unravel. His startup collapsed after burning through $100,000 of my mom's savings, and he moved back home. She called me in tears, talking about how unfair the world was to him, how he just needed one break, how worried she was about his confidence. She barely asked about my life. When she did, it sounded like small talk. The app was still okay, right? I kept my replies short. Yes. It's fine. It's growing. I didn't talk about revenue or employees. There was no point. While he worked retail jobs and talked about jumping back into startups someday, I was negotiating real partnerships. Gym chains wanted branded versions of the app. An insurance company explored incentives for healthy habits tracked through it. I still drove an old car, wore the same worn sneakers, and ate fast food on the office couch. From the outside, nothing looked impressive. Inside, everything was shifting. Then one afternoon, an email landed from a development executive at a major tech firm. They wanted to discuss strategic options, which I learned meant acquisition. I walked into that meeting in my only decent blazer, hands shaking, trying not to look like someone surviving on takeout. They offered $50 million. A number so large it barely felt real. For a second, I imagined calling home, finally hearing the words I'd waited for. Then the details came out. Full control. Aggressive monetization. Turning something people trusted with their health into an ad machine. It didn't sit right. I said no. My lawyers nearly panicked, but refusing that deal sent a message. Soon after, a health-focused investment firm reached out, not to buy, but to help scale. I negotiated hard and accepted $8 million, enough to grow without giving up control. We opened another office, hired more engineers, expanded mental health features, and integrated deeply with major wearable platforms. The app kept growing, quietly and steadily, just like I had. We crossed the milestone of 1 million active users. Yearly revenue climbed into the 8-figure range. By the time I was 25, I signed for a small penthouse in Seattle overlooking the water. I furnished it simply at flat-pack furniture, a few plants I forgot about more often than I cared to admit. I still drove the same tired car. I still showed up to work in hoodies. But the scale of my life had quietly expanded beyond anything I once imagined. The offer that finally mattered didn't come from a shiny tech giant chasing headlines. It came from a massive healthcare organization that wanted to bring preventive wellness into their system. They weren't interested in stripping the app for parts. They wanted to keep the team, protect the brand, and use their reach to help more people. Their number was $150 million. Negotiations dragged on for months. My days blurred into contracts, video calls, and figures so large they made my teenage self feel dizzy. When I finally signed the last document, I walked out of that meeting feeling hollow. After taxes, bonuses for my team, and every unavoidable fee, what remained was around $90 million. $90 million more than anyone had ever expected from me, myself included. I didn't call my mom. I booked an appointment with a therapist. Sitting in that quiet, neutral room, I talked, for the first time, about what it felt like growing up unseen. Being the "you'll be fine" child. The background figure. We unpacked birthdays, brushed aside achievements, and every moment my mother rushed to rescue Steve without even noticing me. I thought success would feel like victory. Mostly, it felt like exhaustion. One session turned into many. Over time, I started donating to health nonprofits, especially those focused on mental health support for women. Somewhere along the way, a realization settled in: I didn't need my mother or my brother to validate me anymore. Their approval had stopped carrying weight long before the money arrived. What I still needed was closure. Not revenge in a dramatic sense. Not a scene. I wanted to know, quietly, what would happen if I returned not as the ignored daughter, but as the woman they had never taken the time to see. As Christmas approached, I found myself browsing flights back to Seattle. My therapist was the first person to suggest it, not because my family deserved anything, but because she wanted me to witness my own change. Treat it like an experiment, she said. Observation, not reunion. That's how I framed it when I booked the ticket from Portland. I wasn't going home for comfort. I was collecting data. I didn't tell my mom about the sale. I simply texted that I was free this year if she still wanted me for Christmas. Her reply came instantly, far warmer than I expected. Of course. Steve will be there too. Just like old times. The heart emoji almost made me laugh. Old times were exactly what made me uneasy. I booked a hotel near the airport instead of staying at the house. That choice alone felt like drawing a boundary I'd never been allowed before. For years, I'd slept on that sagging twin bed in my childhood room. This time, I wanted a door that belonged to me. I landed on Christmas Eve under a familiar gray sky. Seattle smelled the same, wet pavement and cold air. In the hotel room, white sheets and blank walls greeted me. No memories. No echoes. No younger version of myself hoping to be noticed. The next day, I drove to my mom's house. The neighborhood felt smaller than I remembered. Same cracked sidewalks. Same sad park. The house still wore its faded blue paint. Plastic reindeer stood crooked on the lawn, one antler bent. My heart beat faster as I climbed the steps, not from fear, but from something closer to stage nerves. The door opened before I knocked. My mom stood there in an apron dusted with flowers, cheeks flushed from the oven, turkey scent spilling into the cold air. For a brief second, I saw the version of her I used to chase with drawings and report cards. Then it passed. She hugged me quickly, stepped back, and looked me over like a polite stranger. Asked about work. Still doing the computer thing?
Yeah,
I said. Still doing it. That was enough for her. She immediately launched into updates about Steve, how well he was doing, how promising his new idea was, how proud she felt. Her eyes lit up in that familiar way. Inside, nothing had changed. Same artificial tree. Same ornaments. Walls filled with framed photos of Steve on the field, at Stanford, in suits. Not a single one of me. One old picture caught my eye, him on his new bike, my mother's arm wrapped around him, me blurred at the edge of the frame. Almost cropped out. Steve lounged on the couch with a beer, game paused. He smirked, took me in. Made a joke about my little app. I smiled politely. In the kitchen, my mom handed me a dish towel like always. Asked me to help. Poured wine for herself and Steve. Pointed me toward water. Such a small detail, but it said everything. I chopped vegetables while they talked about his plans and how she'd help him make it work this time. No one asked about my life. And for the first time, I didn't feel the ache to be included. I was observing. At the table, the seating was the same as it had always been. I took my old spot. But I wasn't here to fade. Dinner unfolded predictably. Praise for Steve. Laughter. Promises of support. When my mom finally turned to me, it was casual, distracted. Still working on that app? I shrugged. Still working on it. She smiled, relieved she didn't need to dig deeper. As long as I could pay my bills. Steve smirked. Said the word that had followed me for years. Worthless. I didn't react. I just said, calmly, that I'd sold the company. The room fell silent. My mom froze. Steve laughed once, before realizing I wasn't joking. And in that quiet space, something finally shifted. He blinked at me, disbelief spilling across his face. You sold it, he said, curling his fingers into exaggerated air quotes, just like he used to when he mocked my "a little coding thing" growing up. To who? I answered evenly. A healthcare organization. I told them they acquired HealthTrack. Saying the name inside that house, for the first time, felt surreal, like introducing a fully formed adult to relatives who still thought you were imaginary. He scoffed. Okay, so what did you get? A couple $100,000? Enough to finally upgrade from that shoebox you live in? His cheeks were flushed now, partly from wine, partly from the thought that I might have built something real without him. My mom stared at me, eyes wide and unblinking. How much? She asked quietly. How much did they pay? I looked at him and saw the challenge still there, the assumption that no matter what I said, he'd remain on top. I let the silence stretch until it hummed. Then I said it plainly. 150 million. His mouth actually fell open. Not figuratively, but physically. Like his brain had lost connection to the rest of him. My mom's fork slipped from her fingers and clanged against the plate. The color drained from her face so fast it was almost startling. For a moment, no one moved. Then my mom whispered, "That's not funny. Don't joke about things like that." Steve snapped back, louder. "You're lying. Nobody pays that kind of money for a stupid app." I reached into my pocket, unlocked my phone, and turned it toward them. I'd left my banking app open without consciously deciding to. The balance filled the screen, a string of numbers heavy with commas. "That's after taxes," I said softly. "After bonuses. After everything." My mom leaned closer, lips moving as she tried to count. Steve grabbed the phone from her, scrolling hard like he expected a trick. When that wasn't enough, he pulled out his own phone and started typing furiously. Seconds later, I saw my reflection in his glasses as he stared at the screen. An article headline. I knew it by heart. I'd read it alone one night, unable to sleep. Young founder sells health app for $150 million. He skimmed, muttering fragments under his breath. Under 30. Rapid growth. Mental health features. Then he looked up at me like I was someone he'd never met. My mom's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, voice shaking. How could you hide something like this from your own family? I let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. The same way you hid everything from me, I said. The private schools. The trips. The 100,000 you handed him for a failed startup. The forgotten birthdays. The grocery store cakes while you flew out to set up his dorm. Her mouth opened, then closed. That's not fair, she finally said. We did our best. We supported you. No, I said, sharper than I meant to be. You supported him. You invested in him. You built your life around him. You told me I'd be fine, and used that as permission not to try. Steve slammed his fist on the table, glasses rattling. So what, you think you're better than us now? You just got lucky. I stood slowly, napkin sliding to the floor. My hands were steady. My heartbeat wasn't racing. It felt calm, rehearsed, inevitable. Luck didn't write code until 3 a.m, I said. Luck didn't turn down a $50 million deal because it felt wrong. And luck didn't clean up your messes. Mom did. I looked at her, really looked. She seemed smaller somehow, like the center she'd built her world around had finally cracked. You bet everything on the wrong child, I said quietly. And now you're angry because the one you ignored learned how to win without you. She reached for me. Wait. We can talk. Maybe you could help Steve. Invest. We're family. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just help him. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I did stick together, I said. For years. You just didn't notice. I pushed my chair back. The Christmas lights blinked in the window behind them, reflecting off stunned faces. Enjoy dinner, I said. Merry Christmas. Then I walked out of the house I grew up in, leaving behind my mother, my brother, and decades of invisibility sitting at that table. The aftermath didn't explode. It eroded. That night, I sat in my hotel room in the dark, city lights flickering outside. My phone stayed quiet longer than I expected. The next morning came long texts from my mom, confusion mixed with accusations that I'd humiliated Steve. Hours later, messages from him calling me selfish, ungrateful. I didn't reply. 2 days later, a lawyer's letter arrived, demanding $3 million as repayment for the support they'd provided growing up. I handed it to my attorney, who responded with something far colder, a detailed financial breakdown. Every dollar spent on Steve. Every check. And nothing beside my name. He added that if they pushed further, those records would become public. The response was short. They were dropping it. No apology. Just retreat. After that, Steve unraveled. Drinking more. Showing up late. A recorded meltdown at work went viral locally, and he lost his job. His next big idea collapsed under debt. My mom tried to save him again, refinanced the house, drained what was left. It wasn't enough. The house was sold. Her health declined. The family quietly pulled away. The following Christmas, I was in Hawaii with friends. Ocean air. Long hikes. I sent a large donation to a nonprofit that funds therapy for women who can't afford it. That night, a younger cousin messaged me. She said my story made her feel less invisible in her own home. I told her she could call me anytime. She did. I became what I'd needed once. Months later, a handwritten letter arrived from my mom. She apologized. Said she finally saw what she'd lost. Asked for forgiveness. I read it twice. Then I put it away. I'd already done the forgiveness that mattered, the kind that frees you. I didn't send money. I didn't rush back. Boundaries were the only way not to repeat the cycle. I built a new company focused on mental health and AI tools that actually help people check in with themselves. I told parts of my story on stages, not as revenge, but as a lesson. Here's what I learned. Your value isn't measured by who claps for you, who funds you, or who finally admits they were wrong. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop standing in front of people who refuse to see you, and build a life where their approval isn't required. If you've ever been the invisible one, you may not have headlines or millions. But you still have a choice. You can wait to be seen. Or you can start seeing yourself.